deal that guaranteed no nuclear weapons ever, and he tore it up. The U.S. doesn't walk away from diplomatic deals. Other nations do that, but the president established a dangerous precedent. And many of us said to him at the time, if you tear up a diplomatic deal, you are paving the path to war. It might be soon or it might not be soon, but you are paving a path to war. If you make diplomacy impossible, you make war inevitable. And that's exactly what Donald Trump has done. Those troops who have died, they've died because Donald Trump tore up a diplomatic deal. The costs that are being experienced by American consumers, we are suffering those costs because Donald Trump tore up a diplomatic deal. The injuries to civilians, to school children, the injuries to American troops, those are occurring because Donald Trump tore up a diplomatic deal.
That wasn't a speech. That was a bill of particulars. 13 American service members are dead, hundreds more injured. Gas is up over $1 a gallon. The USS Gerald Ford carrier group just broke the modern record for the longest deployment in American history, and those sailors were supposed to be home before Christmas. And here's what makes it devastating. Trump says the whole reason for this war was to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. But Trump himself had the deal that stopped Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and he tore it up in 2018, against the advice of his own Secretary of State, his own Secretary of Defense, and the International Atomic Energy Agency, which confirmed Iran was fully complying. He destroyed the solution. Then he started a war to fix the problem he created. Now his approval rating is at 37%. The generic congressional ballot has flipped to Democrats by nearly 6 points. Even Republican senators are starting to go quiet. The war is unpopular. The economy is bleeding. The ceasefire talks in Pakistan just collapsed. And not one public congressional hearing has been held, not one, in 45 days of combat. Watch what Kaine does next, because he doesn't let a single talking point.
Mr. President, I rise in support of my colleagues' War Powers resolution. I am proud to be a co-sponsor with Senator Duckworth, and I'm very humbled to be here in the chamber and listen to her. Listen to her recount her own experience and her own vow as a member of this body to take the very painful lesson that she absorbed when her future was completely altered by her wartime service and put it to a positive use in trying to protect others like her. Senator Duckworth proves a point that gets proved over and over and over again, that our military serve with distinction and bravery. They serve with professionalism and excellence. But so often, the issue for them is the quality of the civilian decisions about whether they go to war or not. And so often in my lifetime, in Vietnam and Iraq and now in Iran, that brave service was compromised, really betrayed by poor civilian decision-making for improper political reasons rather than careful assessment of what was in America's best interests. I have been asking the question since this war began, have we learned nothing from 25 years of war, unproductive war in the Middle East? And it is pretty apparent to me, having asked that question over and over again, that this administration has not. This administration has not factored in the 14,000 plus deaths in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've not factored in the more than 65,000 American troops and contractors who were injured. They've not factored in hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths. They've not factored in the fact that the U.S. military engagements did not produce a safer region. They've not factored in the $8 trillion spent during those 25 years. They've acted as if that history is now wiped away and we can engage in a war in the Middle East without reflecting upon these lessons that are written in blood and in the precious resources of our nation. And so I'm not going to ask the question again today, have we learned nothing from 25 years? Because I think the answer to that, sadly, is plain. So let me ask a different question. What have we learned in 45 days of war in Iran? What have we learned? I would argue that we've learned at least three things. War is costly. An unwise war is deeply unpopular. And those who would make diplomacy impossible make war inevitable. I think those are the lessons that the last 45 days have taught us. First, war is costly. As my colleague laid out, 13 members of our armed services, one who lived in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, who had purchased a home, was within a few months of retirement, wanting to retire to that home with his family, have died. And spouses and kids and parents and friends and brothers and sisters are mourning the loss in this unwise and illegal war. Hundreds of our troops have been injured, and stories come out about the depth of those injuries and the lack of planning that left them exposed to the attacks that caused them to be injured. And while I wish it were otherwise, it's likely that there will be more such stories. But there's also the cost in dollars. We're spending, by some estimates, between $1 billion and $2 billion a day. We're expecting to see the president sometime soon send over a new request for a dramatic increase in funding to fund this Iran war. But let me talk about cost in a different way, just cost to everyday Americans' pocketbooks. Today is tax day. Today is tax day. President Trump is the taxer-in-chief. Last year, he imposed chaotic tariffs on the world's economy right before tax day. And those tariffs cost American families a couple of $1,000s each. This one-man tariff war that President Trump started without congressional authority, that was ultimately, in significant part, struck down as illegal by the Supreme Court in February of this year. Last year, right before tax day, President Trump stood up and showed by his actions that he's the taxer-in-chief. And this year, on tax day, we are seeing Americans pay more for food, pay more for energy, pay more for building supplies because of the actions of this president. In particular, just the price of gas at the gas pump. In Virginia and nationally, the price of gas has gone up $1 a gallon since February 27th, just because of President Trump's unilateral decision to take us to war. Virginians buy 8 million gallons of gas a day. So that's $8 million Virginians are having to shell out of their pocket that they weren't having to shell out because Donald Trump started this war. This is happening in Illinois, it's happening in Connecticut, it's happening in Nebraska, it's happening in every state, and it's happening all over the world. We're reading about economies that are shutting down one day a week. We're reading about street protests in allied nations over the costs of petroleum, all driven by this one man deciding to take us to war. So the first lesson from the last 45 days, war is costly. The second lesson is an unwise war is deeply unpopular. This war is deeply unpopular with the American public. Most of us took the last 2 weeks of recess to travel around our states. I represent Virginia, which I believe is one of the most pro-military states in the country. I spent significant time in the Hampton Roads area, the center of American naval power, where we build ships and subs, biggest Navy base in the world, and I spent a lot of time with Virginians over the last 2 weeks. This war is unpopular. Virginians are deployed and they don't know why, and they don't know when they'll come home. The USS Ford carrier today passes the record for the longest deployment of a carrier in American modern history. They were supposed to be home with their families before Christmas, and they are still deployed away from their families with significant maintenance issues, reducing quality of life on that ship. This war is unpopular. But of course it's unpopular. If you go to war without a clear rationale, and the president has floated 5 or 6 of them, if you go to war without a clear plan, without apparently anticipating what everyone would have anticipated, the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, if you go to war without allies, if you go to war without Congress, the war will be unpopular. No plan, no rationale, no allies, no congressional debate. The war will be unpopular. This was so easy to predict at the beginning. For some reason, the president thought the magic of his own personality could turn a war of choice into something that would be embraced by the American public. The American public is too smart for that. And so an unwise war is deeply unpopular. That's a lesson of the last 45 days. And then the last lesson, I believe, is a profound one that we have to acknowledge, and that is this: those who make diplomacy impossible make war inevitable. The president, the vice president, his UN representative, even within the last 2 hours in a hearing before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, said the war was necessary to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. There was no intelligence that said that Iran was near getting a nuclear weapon. But if what President Trump wanted to do was to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, then he committed one of the most egregious blunders in the history of the United States in his first term when he tore up a diplomatic deal that did precisely that. The United States and our European allies and adversaries, China and Russia, engaged in a 20-month negotiation with Iran that led to an agreement. And on the first page of the agreement, page 1, Iran reaffirms that it will never seek to purchase or develop any nuclear weapons. We had the agreement with Iran for no nuclear weapons. We had mechanisms of inspection. We have limitations on centrifuges and limitations on the enrichment of plutonium or uranium. We had a diplomatic deal, and the president tore it up. The deal was working according to our allies. The deal was working according to President Trump's first Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, who urged him to stay in it. The deal was working according to the International Atomic Energy Agency that was investigating and inspecting Iranian facilities. But President Trump took a...
Survive. Let's be clear about what just happened on the floor of the United States Senate. Tim Kaine didn't speculate. He didn't editorialize. He laid out a documented, sequential case. A working diplomatic deal existed. It was killing Iran's nuclear program. Trump's own team begged him to stay in it. He ignored them. The deal collapsed. Iran enriched uranium. And now, 13 Americans are dead. Hundreds are injured, and the country is paying $1 billion to $2 billion a day for a war that started because one man blew up the solution. That's not politics. That's a timeline, and Trump can't escape it because the evidence is his own record, his own first-term Secretary of State, his own Secretary of Defense, the IAEA, his own allies, all on the record saying the deal was working, all ignored. Now the ceasefire talks have collapsed. The Strait of Hormuz is partially restricted. Families are still waiting for carrier sailors who were supposed to be home in December. And Republican senators are going quiet, not defending the war, just going quiet, which is what happens when a political coalition starts calculating exit ramps. The war is unpopular. The president is at 37%. The midterm map is moving against his party. This is what the end of a political overreach looks like before the overreach officially ends. Kaine's final line said everything. If you make diplomacy impossible, you make war inevitable. Trump made diplomacy impossible. And now the question isn't whether this war was a mistake. The question is how long the people enabling it can keep pretending it wasn't. If this video broke something down for you, hit subscribe. There's a lot more coming. Drop a comment. What do you think happens next with Iran?